Welcome, everyone. The webinar will begin shortly and will be recorded. Connect with the Campaign for Grade Level Reading on social media. On Facebook, like the page Campaign for GLR, and on Twitter, follow the account at Reading by Third. Please use hashtag Learning Tuesdays and tag us to tweet anything you learned from today's webinar, and we'll be sure to retweet. We encourage you to share your questions, reflections, and observations on social media. Once again, we would love to connect. So on Facebook, like the page Campaign for GLR, and on Twitter, follow the account at Reading by Third. The webinar will begin shortly. It will be recorded and shared with you afterwards. Okay, once again, welcome to today's webinar. My name is Sierra Sanchez, and I will be behind the scenes helping to produce this conversation. I have just a few housekeeping details before we get started. First, we would love for you to introduce yourself, so please use the chat box at the bottom of the screen to share your name, city or state, and your organization. Be sure when responding to select both panelists and attendees so that we all know who is here. All attendees are in listen-only mode, but we encourage your engagement by posting questions in the Q&A box. We will dedicate the last portion of the conversation to respond to the questions you post. This webinar is being recorded, and a link to the recording will be emailed on Friday to all who registered. And we are streaming the webinar on our Facebook Live page. All resources that you see shared as links in the chat will be compiled and shared in a follow-up email to all webinar registrants, and materials are accessible on GLR's Community Learning for Impact and Improvement platform, aka CLIP. Please take a few seconds to create a free account if you haven't yet done so that you don't miss the bio slides and other materials from today's session. Finally, we'll be posting a brief on-screen evaluation during Q&A and highly encourage you to respond. This helps us with our commitment to continuous improvement. Lastly, before we start, I would just like to call your attention to our upcoming GLR Learning Tuesdays webinars. Next week on October 5th, we have an exciting double header beginning at 12:30 p.m. Eastern Time with a funder to funder conversation following up to a session we had last winter about philanthropy's response to the multiple disasters students and families are grappling with. Then at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, we again are co-sponsoring a 60-minute session with Education Week and our mission critical partners at the Rollins Center for Language and Literacy, this time focused on trauma-informed practices and the construction of the deep reading brain. The following week on October 12th, we have another double session, first with a crucible of practice, and then with another session continuing our series on equitable learning acceleration amidst the pandemic, as you can see on the screen. We'll be sure to add a link in the chat box for more information and registration for these upcoming sessions. And please keep an eye out for our emails with more detail. Joining you now is Emily Samos, Senior Consultant with the Campaign for Grade Level Reading. Thank you and enjoy the webinar.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to all of you. And thank you so much for joining us for today's GLR Learning Tuesdays webinar, The Kindergarten Exodus, Why, Where, and What We Can Do Now. Today's exchange of ideas continues our series focused on recovery and equitable learning acceleration as we continue to grapple with the concerns and confusion that are plaguing schools and families amidst COVID-19 variants and protocol shifts. Our discussion today will take a closer look at what the New York Times called the kindergarten exodus and data indicating where and why children are not transitioning from early child care settings into K-12 schools. We have the privilege of partnering with New America for today's conversation, as they have been deeply focused on the issue and have conducted important studies and created useful tools for the field. We will have the chance to learn about this work from Laura Bornfriend, New America's Director of Early and Elementary Education Policy, and then hear from 4 outstanding superintendents from diverse communities about how they are responding to this issue and working to re-engage families and re-enroll young students. And to get us started, I have the privilege of introducing our moderator and presenter, Laura Bornfriend, who will then briefly introduce our panel of superintendents. Laura is the Director of Early and Elementary Education Policy with the Education Policy Program at New America, where she leads a team of writers and policy analysts working on how to strengthen children's learning experiences from birth through 3rd grade. So Laura, I am pleased to now turn it over to you.
Thank you, Emily, and thank you to the Campaign for Grade Level Reading for partnering on this important webinar. I'm thrilled to be with all of you this afternoon. And before I talk about some of the work we've been doing at New America, I want to introduce our panelists, our 4 superintendents. Very excited to have each of you with us today. First, I'm happy to introduce Dr. Kyla Johnson-Trammell. She's superintendent of the Oakland Unified School District and has spent most of her 22-year career in the district as an elementary school teacher, as well as a middle school and elementary school principal. She has been named Outstanding Principal of Alameda County and earned the Outstanding District Leadership Award. Welcome. Next, we have Superintendent Michael Kurt. He is superintendent of the Wichita Falls Independent School District in Wichita Falls, Texas. As superintendent since 2004, Mike has led 3 diverse Texas school districts. He's been instrumental in improving classroom technology environments and was recognized as the Tech Savvy Superintendent of the Year. He's also a member of the Superintendent's Early Learning Cohort. Welcome. We also have Dr. Cheryl Logan. She's superintendent of Omaha Public Schools. She's on the next slide. And Dr. Logan was previously Chief Academic Officer with the School District of Philadelphia. Dr. Logan has spent her career in education, working in school districts with large immigrant populations from around the world, including with students from significant English language learner populations. And we also have Dr. Elena Zachary-Ross as superintendent of Ypsilanti Community Schools. And she was previously the superintendent of schools for the Muskegon Heights Public School Academy, the first public charter school district in the United States. She's recognized as being responsible for turning around the entire district profile, including in issues on student discipline, attendance, and graduation rates. Thank you so much to all 4 of you for joining us here today. I'm really looking forward to my discussion with these 4 superintendents in a few moments, but first, I'll share some context for our discussion and a little about some work that New America is doing with Education Council. Next slide, please. In July, Education Council in New America published a policy toolkit for effective and supportive transitions into pre-K and the early grades for children, families, and educators in fall of 2021 and beyond. Why the focus on transition? We knew it was really important for school districts and communities and states to be thinking about transition in a couple of ways. First, the transition from early childhood settings, whether it's a 4-year-old classroom in childcare or Head Start, into public school settings, perhaps public pre-K or kindergarten. And second, thinking about the transition from whatever children and families experienced in 2020 and spring 2021 to new environments now in fall 2021. We know we're not past the pandemic yet, but many, many children are back in the classroom. Many, many educators are back in the classroom. We also wanted states, school districts, and communities to be thinking not just about this school year, but also thinking about the next several years and younger children and their pandemic experiences. Younger children who will be entering school over the next several years. We need to think now about how best to serve them and their families and support their educators. On this slide, we talk a little bit about what we know about children's experiences in the pandemic. We saw declines in kindergarten enrollment. We saw a decline in pre-K enrollment, especially for children from low-income families. We know these declines in enrollment declines more broadly across K-12 may have been undercounted, with fewer children who experience homelessness being identified by schools and communities. We also know that many anticipated bubbles in kindergarten, maybe even first grade, setting up enrollment surges for this fall. We know that many families struggled with juggling childcare and work. And we also know that many children and families, especially Black, Indigenous, and other families of color, and families in low-income communities, have experienced significant loss and trauma over the last 18 months. Next slide, please. So considering the state of children and families during the and educators and their experiences through the pandemic. For our toolkit, we talked to experts and states and local officials about what they were most worried about for the fall of 2021 and beyond, and things like increased demand for pre-K, an influx in kindergartners, first graders with limited or no kindergarten experience, supporting children who experience trauma, thinking about children with a wider range of knowledge and skills and social emotional development than in previous years, and the potential for staffing shortages. All of these rose to the top. We discussed this and other scenarios, and in our toolkit, we offer potential solutions for states and local communities. Next slide, please. And then in August, the New York Times reporters Dana Goldstein and Alicia Carolpiano elevated enrollment challenges to the national stage, finding that more than 1 million children did not enroll in local schools during the 2021 school year. And many of these children we know were 5-year-olds in low-income communities. Some places saw kindergarten enrollment drops of at least 20%. Why? Well, in part, state requirements. Kindergarten is not required in those states, and the compulsory age for school is not until 6, 7, or even 8 in some places. But also, we know some parents did not want remote schooling as their child's first formal educational experience, or did not feel equipped to support remote schooling at home. For some families with children who did participate in virtual learning, parents were unhappy with the experience their child had. How well did their virtual experience prepare them? Next slide, please. The transition toolkit that New American Education Council created offers states and school districts a guiding framework for considering the most important areas, and some of those we'll talk about today, and plan for how best to meet them for young learners during this challenging time and moving forward. And on slide 12, we call attention to a broad set of federal funding streams that can support this work. Things that we traditionally think about with the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, but also things like Medicaid and other funding streams that can be helpful to support this work. Comprehensive transition planning is a year-round process and will require state and local communities to strengthen and coordinate several different systems. It will also require reflecting on what has gone well and what hasn't, being flexible to meet new needs, and listening to educators and families. But we believe it's an important frame, transition is an important frame for rethinking children's early educational experiences now, during this year, and post-pandemic. Next slide, please. To find our toolkit, there's a link in the chat, or you can visit our website. And this brings me to our discussion today. So I'd like to invite our superintendents to come on screen. And I'm very honored once again to be joined by Superintendent Jonathan Trammell, Superintendent Kurt, Superintendent Logan, and Superintendent Zachary Ross. Let's dig in. So to begin, we really want to understand the context, a little about your school districts, what modes of learning were in place during the last year, and what went well in 2020, and what are you thinking about coming into, or what were you thinking about coming into this school year? What were those top priorities, especially at the elementary level? And what have you put in place to try to address those priorities and challenges? So Superintendent Jonathan Trammell, easy question. Let's start with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Laura, and good afternoon to everyone out there virtually. I'm so glad that you all could join this discussion. And one of the reasons that I love doing panels is for whatever I share that can be of value. I feel like I get tenfold just information that I can, think about and reflect about to figure out how to better serve the students and families. So looking forward to the discussion. I'm Dr. Kyla Johnston Trammell. I'm the superintendent in Oakland Unified School District in the Bay Area, Oakland, California. and I've spent the majority of my career there in a number of capacities. I like to say that our district, our strength is also our greatest challenge, which is our diversity in every sense of the word. We are about 50,000 students. We are about 2/3 district-run public schools and 1/3 charter-run public schools, with some of them are district authorizing and some of them are county authorizing. 2/3 of our students are Latinx, Latino, Latina, and African American. The other third ranges from Native American, Asian Pacific Islander, multi-ethnic, Caucasian, Filipino. 50% of our students speak a language other than English at home. I believe at last count, we have over 130, 140 languages spoken in Oakland. 1/3 of our students are defined as English language learners, and about 2,900 as of last year were newcomer students. We're about 71, 72% free and reduced lunch. So as you can see, we have a very just wide range of students with wonderful assets, but obviously very different needs. I say all of this because, as you can imagine, with the pandemic, it was a very challenging time for all of us. And I would say that one success is that we are all still living and breathing through the last 18 months, which I don't think any of us have seen anything like it, unless you were around in schools during the time of polio. So there's just a lot of learning for everyone. I think some of the immediate pieces were, kids can't learn if they're hungry and they don't have some of the basic needs. The two kind of big things that kind of were top of mind, particularly for our little ones, was making sure, again, back to our numbers, 71% and higher for all of those that just did not fill out forms, just the level of hunger. And so we went straight to work. We didn't miss a beat. I told my staff, we'll worry about the finances later. We need to feed our kids, which we did. We had wonderful support from Curry Foundation, our Alameda County Food Bank. We actually created a home delivery system because one of the things we noticed is when we went to distance learning, the number of families coming to our food distribution centers dropped. Families said, I can't come because I got to be home to make sure my kids are online. So my team quickly went to work with some outside partners and figured out a way to do home delivery. We went from about 20% of kids who were connected either with a device and wireless to 99% within the first year. Again, our mission in Oakland is we are a full service community school district. Our theory of action is our best chance at eliminating the opportunity gap is to actually work in a cross sector way. School district, public-private partnerships, parents and families. Much easier said than done, but the work that we were able to do to get all of our students, including our early childhood families, devices, and to really track it, not only by grade, by race and ethnicity, so that we could track and make sure our most vulnerable populations had access to these materials, was crucial so that we could pivot to distance learning. I'll end with, we were in distance learning, but quickly, as I'm sure around the country, we found our most vulnerable, particularly our homeless families, many of our newcomer families. We had feedback, we need a place to actually be online. Many students' home environments wasn't necessarily conducive. So we formed partnerships with community organizations to create community hubs. So while we were working with our labor partners, we had places for some of our most vulnerable to be able to be online and have some sort of in-person interaction. We expanded that to hubs for some of our special needs students, and then went towards in-person learning toward the end of last year. Lots of lessons learned, but I know that I'm running out of time, and I will pass it back to you, Laura, and I can pick up where I am ending for the next question. So thank you.
We'll come back to lessons learned. I'll tee that up for sure. Thank you so much. Superintendent Hurt, same question to you. Tell us a little bit about your district and last year, what went well and what were you thinking about most coming into this year?
Okay, so we should have some slides coming up. Okay, great. Thank you very much. Mike Kurtz, Superintendent, Wichita Falls ISD. Next slide. I am a proud member of the AASA Early Learning Cohort, which is a group of superintendents from across the nation. And our number one focus is figuring out how we get everybody, superintendents, anyone to understand that early childhood matters most. And that goal is to get them to the same starting line. How do we get all of our students ready to run that race we know they have to run because they come from such diverse backgrounds? Go ahead, next slide. We are a regional school district. I call us a rural urban school district in North Texas. So about 2.5 hour drive or so northwest of Dallas. We're a regional hub for medical, social skills, social emotional services, governmental services, things like that. But all around us are lots of very small small rural communities with school districts, 30-something school districts around us with probably less than 1,000 students on average. And so of that, we're the largest economic engine, I guess, in that whole North Texas area. A little bit less than 14,000 students. And 3 years ago, we had over 14,000 students. So we lost about 600 students last year, or 1920 school year, 2021 school year, we lost about 600 students. Next slide. So what did we do? We've been pretty active, and we have an awesome Parents as Teachers program where we send educators into the homes of 4-year-olds, 3-year-olds, 2-year-olds, whoever qualifies for this program. We have about 130 or so families we're sending these educators in to try to help parents become their child's first teacher, connect them with social services, and connect them with schools. And then we have early childhood programs. We have our own Head Start that we run, and we also have state-run pre-K. Both of these programs are full-day programs. And so those have always been obviously in person, but now they have been remote and in person. Last year, we had about 63% of our students that started out in person and 37% were remote. We ended the year about 88% in person and 12% remote. However, for our district, that means about 1,200 students never came to school last year. And so we did not ever see them. And we lost students. And so we normally have a cohort of a little bit more than 1,000 students. We had 18% less pre-K students, 13% less kindergartners, and 9% less first graders that came to school. Now those numbers have come back a little bit. This year we were 100% online, 100% in person. We do not have an online option until just recently in our state because for some reason we don't believe that that was necessary and it wasn't funded. So that's a bone of contention for me. And then we also have programs that we do in-house that we're really excited. We offer the Waterford Upstart program, which is an online program that students that are not enrolled in our district, we provide them with a Chromebook and we provide them with a MiFi, and they're able to do an online literacy program 5 days a week for the whole year before they actually come to school. So next program or next slide, I think. Okay, and so that kind of gives you some numbers where we are. So we were asynchronous last year on elementary campuses. We did have some live opportunities for students, but for the most part, we expected parents to help their children if they chose to keep them at home. This year, we are all back face-to-face, like I said, and we did have state tests last year, because that's what we believe in doing in Texas is testing. And results obviously were not good. We saw 10 and 20% drops across the state in everything we did. And so therefore, if you were not successful last year on the test, you're now required to have a minimum of 30 hours of intervention throughout the school year, 30 minutes minimum per week of intervention. And so we're right now in the middle of an intervention crisis. We don't have people to work. We don't have subs for classrooms. We don't have the ability to do small groups. And these has to be in groups of 3 to 1 teacher to student ratios. And so that's really not working for us. And this year and last year, we implemented NWE's map growth to try to give us some different data because we knew state testing data wasn't going to work for us. and I mentioned Waterford. So I think my time's about up.
Thank you, Superintendent Kurt. And Superintendent Logan, so same question to you. Tell us about your district and let us know what were the things that worked well and things that didn't work last year, and what was top of mind coming into this this school year.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Cheryl Logan. I'm Superintendent of Omaha Public Schools. So we have 53,000 students. We are currently building 5 schools. We will open 4 brand new ones in the fall. So we've been doing that magic during the pandemic. 2 high schools and 2 elementary schools, which actually are tracking way ahead of schedule. Like 1 elementary school will be turned over to us next month, and the 2 high schools in March, well ahead. So that's, that was kind of interesting. Last year, we opened our school year remote in Nebraska, in Omaha, and we went to in-person learning pretty quickly. So in September, by mid-September, our most vulnerable students receiving special education, separate class, with some pretty significant, are back in school every day. And then we started bringing back everyone. The first week in October, we brought back our K-8 or pre-K through 8. And then we brought back our high schoolers like 2 weeks later on a 3-2 model. Kids went either 3 or 2 days a week. And then in February, everybody came back. So we had in-person schooling for most of the year last year, although part of the year was on a hybrid schedule. We did maintain a full remote for families through February. That was where they could actually be in the classroom with the teacher. And then once everybody came back, we went to an asynchronous for those families. We did have a significant number of folks, a little over 11,000 of that 53,000 students who remained remote for the entire year. We can certainly see the fruits of that at this point as children transition back to learning school behaviors and the things that go along with that. We are seeing a surge. We did see a significant dip last year. It was about 17.5% in kindergarten, and we certainly see our kindergarten surging. We have the largest kindergarten class we've had in a few years. And if you go to visit schools, you see kindergartners that are up to your waist and some that are up to your shoulder because of the very large age span difference for kids who redshirted, or we call it COVID shirted last year and did not go to kindergarten, which is presenting a lot of challenges, especially developmentally, when you have almost 6-year-olds and 6 kids who are +6 or 6.5, and kids who are barely 5 together in the same grade and classroom. Our school district is really diverse. People don't expect that for the middle of the country. We are 73% students of color. The majority, well, not necessarily, well, you guys can say majority, 38 to 39% are Latino. And then we have our next largest group is actually white at 26%, then Black at 20, right there together. They're almost identical. And we have a pretty significant Asian population that is our emerging demographic, Thai refugees. That demographic is growing very quickly, 8, 10%, but 30, 40, 60, 80% in some schools where there are particular hubs and places that people have chosen to live. So it's a little bit about our school district. That was our learning modality. What we're seeing right now is probably what everybody else is seeing. The most severe behaviors we're seeing are little kids. There's not, the big ones are doing some crazy stuff, but that's on a whole nother, that's their choosing to do that. But we are really seeing some significant behavior challenges with our youngest students. We are making 10, 15, there are some days when we made 20 CPS referrals in one day. That used to be like for a week. It is really a a dire situation in terms of what's going on in these homes. Obviously, mental health challenges are what's going on, as well as some physical health challenges that have happened and that are currently occurring with our young people and their families this year. So it's a little bit about the Omaha Public Schools.
Thank you, Superintendent Logan. And I want to come back to that discussion thread around discipline and behavior and mental health needs. But first, so hold me to that if I forget. But first, I'd love to hear the same question I posed the same question to you, Superintendent Zachary Ross. What was the experience last year? Tell us about your district and what's top of mind right now.
Thank you. Hello, I'm Dr. Alina Zachary Ross from Ypsilanti Community Schools. We're in Ypsilanti, Michigan, right next door to Ann Arbor. And we have 3,700 students. About 76% of them are students of color. 70% of them are free and reduced lunch, and we like to say all of them, 100% of them have exceptional opportunities and possibilities as scholars. Last year, we had the opportunity to have 3 learning profiles. We surveyed our parents really early the previous year and asked the parents and staff what did they want to do. So we had an in-person all year option. We had a remote to transition to in-person and an online option all year. And we did that because we wanted to ensure the class sizes as we transition back would follow our health department guidelines. And that really worked in terms of allowing the students and their teacher to stay together the entire year. What was successful for us was having a plan for success. We had a task force of over 100 staff members who participated, and we created this timeline here so that we can know how to communicate with the community, how to keep them together, and how to best engage those students we had not connected with. As many of you know, we're Perry Elementary. Everyone knows about the Perry project if you are part of early learning work. And so we knew it's so important to get ahead of the game and reach out to those families. On the next slide, you'll see that just like my colleague, Dr. Kyla Johnson-Trammell, we had to also go find out, how do I get to the community? Because although we had the in-person learning, some of our parents said, we're not putting my child, especially the youngest ones, on a bus. So what can you do? So we presented in-person learning labs in their community at the housing development areas, as well as Park Ridge Community Center. There, we provided an in-person academic support. They can log in online to their in-person class all day, yet there was opportunities for the additional support from a tutor. We had breakfast and lunch and provided homework help. And although we offered internet services and laptops, we know that they are sometimes slower in a house if you had multiple children. And so many of our students went there to access the internet. On the next slide, it shows our Boots on the Ground campaign, because we realized we could not, again, reach our students and do the connections that we needed to do just remotely or even with the population that was in person. So on the next slide, it shows you who we partnered with. We partnered with parents and community partners to ensure that we were outreaching. So we went to the community to plan. We had the Ann Arbor Summer Festival where we had our Men of Color read. We gave out books. We engaged them, our students who we hadn't engaged with, especially the youngest ones who hadn't been at school already. We went to several sites across our community to have enrollment opportunities, to talk to parents about what kind of tutoring options there were, how to enroll in our Grizzly Learning Camp that started the week after school was out. We were in all summer long in person to make that transition happen. We continued our feeding program and went door to door in this Boots on the Ground campaign to every single neighborhood every week on Tuesdays and Saturdays to make those connections, to do wellness checks, to share information about the library, about the YWMCA, any kind of academic resource we could give. And each one of those campaigns were led by one of our team members, as well as a volunteer from one of these community partners that you see. Another thing that we did to really engage that youngest students was get to the parent. And so we offered compassion resilience circles, which were 6-week sessions online for parents and for our students and staff. And those circles were just intimate circles they could sign up voluntarily for, but every week for 6 weeks, they would engage. And so with that work, we learned about the need for high dosage tutoring, as well as ensuring that we would get them information through these town halls. So on the next slide, you'll see that we created a Grizzly Learning Camp. And on the next slide, you'll see how that was, how we engaged. It was active participation. With us being a small district, we could pull this off. So we started the week after school was out. Students were able to select camp to attend in person to be able to transition to this in person, all through project-based learning, looking at standards, and just having fun. On the next slide, you will also see the participation. So for us in our county, we brought in 81 preschool students, which, as you know, they hadn't been in school. We gave every preschooler iPads. In our county, most of our preschools don't have iPads. We were the only ones, but we wanted them to engage in our Imagine Learning and Imagine Math. 237 kindergarten and first grades, and 369 elementary, and the rest were middle and high school. On the next slide, you'll see that our plans for this year, which I'm not going to go totally into because Laura will be bringing us to that, but we re-engaged all of our students, and we continue with the high dosage tutoring using supports. And we are going to engage our families with our FACE conference because our surveys tell us that we have to continue to do that to keep our students engaged. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Superintendent. And thank you to all of you. And I want to jump right back into, where both, well, all of you talked about, community partnerships. All of you talked about some aspects of needing to address social emotional needs and trauma. And so I want to jump back into where Superintendent Logan kind of left off around, addressing children's, behavioral needs, or just, social emotional needs that are coming out in, in ways, in sometimes challenging ways, and how do we support adults in, handling those. And so if you could talk a little bit about just what you're seeing in, what schools are seeing this year, particularly for the youngest children, and how you're addressing those, how schools are addressing those. Whoever wants to jump in, please start.
Well, I'm happy to start, if that's okay. I think one of the things, we have almost 100 schools, and we have 51 social workers. We have more social workers than HHS. And I was on a call with some of my colleagues in the area, nonprofits and other organizations, and everybody's saying, well, they can't find social workers. I'm like, yeah, that's because we fired them all. But we could have 102, right? So that's going to be part of the issue. Some of the things that we are seeing really are much bigger than us. And I think that we have to have a conversation with everybody in the room, because kids are with us 7 hours a day and someplace else 17 hours a day. And we're going to beat our heads against the wall trying to address this in a silo as a school district. The things that kids have clearly been exposed to, they've been watching everything, and then they're repeating some of those things in school. the things that some of their parents and the kinds of behaviors that they've witnessed in their parents, and they don't know if those things are wrong because their parents or their aunts or their uncles are doing it, and so those are their role models. So it's, you know, some of this stuff, you know, we literally are having conversations with kids about, do they even know that it's wrong, right? Or inappropriate, maybe is a better word. But that is, that really is what is going to be the changer, is everybody working together. It just can't be schools. The problem is so, I think, insidious and deep. And I'm a hopeful, I have a hopeful spirit. I feel like we can pretty much do anything, but this is literally like digging out after I don't know, a volcano has erupted. I mean, and everything's kind of covered with stuff, and there's stuff that has to come off first before you can even kind of get to dealing with that. And I just feel like as communities, we are having to have a much broader discussions. I will tell you, I spend more physicians now, and not about COVID, right? Because we're dealing with COVID as, you know, one thing, but physicians in terms of children who are not thriving. So failure to thrive is something we normally see in infants, right? We're seeing 3 and 4 and 5-year-olds who are malnourished and are not absorbing nutrition, are not absorbing nutrients because they are failing to thrive because of the community, that the conditions in the households. And we're seeing on such a large scale that we have to work with our health partners, with our public health officials. You know, we don't send kids home because we're masked. We don't send kids home for quarantine anymore, because we are making them less safe. They are not safer going home, and because of the precautions and and we look at the guidelines, and we're masked. And I think these are kind of like underlying conversations that we have to have with folks, because if we look at the social determinants of health, children staying home has done as much damage, I'm sorry to say this, as some of what we thought was intervention to make our communities safe. And I think, to me, these are fundamental conversations we have to have before we can even get to recovery, because we have people who still want folks to stay home, cloistered, for health reasons. And I mean, we're all believers. I was in a vaccine study. So, I mean, I'm a believer, but I also feel like the social determinants of health have been ignored. And that is what was manifesting. Some of those other things are what we see manifesting in our school, the things that have not been attended to during the last 19 or 20 months, depending on where you're located in the country. So that may be a little bit off topic, but it is fundamental to the conversation before we get to all this other, before we teach kids how to read, and whether or not how we help our families come out from the volcano, from the ash from the volcano, and being cloistered, because some of that is lingering in their ability to move forward. And so if mom can't move forward, and caregivers, whoever it is in the home, families can't move forward in terms of their daily living, and how they re-engage, we're going to have a real hard time getting to the next piece. And so my wondering is about just always having all those other partners in the room with you. They want to be in the room with you, but they're also don't have any staff. They have all this, they have all the same challenges that we do, but they also need they need our support, because the only place that they know they can find the kids is in school. And so if you have partners that need to be able to see kids, that you've got to work to give them access to the whole family there, because it's for many families that are in the most dire situation, that's the best place to make any sort of an intervention.
So may I jump in? Is that okay, Laura?
Yeah, I was gonna ask you to jump in, so go. Yes.
Yeah, everything that Ms. Cheryl Logan said resonates with me, even on the West Coast, different state, similar demographics, a lot of the same issues. And kind of back to our mission, being a community school district, a lot of our work over the last 8 to 10 years has been around how do you reimagine systems, programs, and structures to do cross-sector work, which is extremely difficult, and particularly when you're trying to do this type of stuff on scale, because fundamentally the issues, well, I say it two ways. One, there's nothing I think we're seeing that wasn't already there. It was just hidden behind for your average American. I'm excluding everybody on this call because people who've been in education and working with the most vulnerable, you've seen it, right? I mean, as a teacher, I've seen kids, looking through the trash can because they, were coming to school hungry. But the way that this pandemic put it, out in the open with a flashlight for everyone to see, we have kids who are hungry, right? The impact of domestic abuse, the impact of, every kind of socio-emotional, inequitable type of ailment in our society. Every American would see it. You turn on CNN, you look at your Twitter feed, and you would just see, the impact. Then you add the pandemic and it just kind of quadrupled the intensity, right, of what we're facing, to the point where it is impossible to try to do this work, as a silo, which I feel is the evolution right now in public sector work. There's no way forward by thinking about infrastructure the way things were pre-pandemic. And even if we take aside the socio-emotional pieces, and I'll stay there and then kind of come back to literacy. One of the things that I've seen just in terms of our staff and leadership is like how we build the capacity of folks to continue to be adaptive and to be nimble, and to really understand the importance of folks taking care of themselves, to actually care for the students and families that we're asking them to do, because the trauma is compounded, right? We've got many folks that work in our schools that are in the same community that many of our students and families are coming from. So they've seen death, right? You don't know the circumstances they're in. So we spent a lot of time scientifically, particularly at the beginning of the year, just talking about, and me in particular, like I need your executive functioning part of your brain to be on point. So I can't have you stressed out to the point where now you're making not the best judgment calls and you're in front of students and you're with families. So, the importance of, figuring out how our leaders, whether they're of central departments or of schools and classrooms, everybody really saying it's actually important for our mission and vision for you to do the things that you need to do to self-care. We're looking for other partners to do more mental health for staff because of the things that they're seeing even more than they were before. That's one. Two, trying to identify, well, what were some of the pieces, that we're working? We've invested for years in community school managers, restorative justice, behavioral mental health. So kind of pulling on those folks and those structures to really figure out, where do you kind of delve in deeper, and really seeing the need for one-on-one conversations with families, and how you systematize that as best as you can and bring in, we're partnering with our after-school providers, and really paying attention to community-based organizations in our community that actually have capacity at scale, right? To do home visits, you know, checking in on kids, leaning on our student leadership councils to constantly hear from our youth, right? Our high school youth who invariably have, you know, kindergarten siblings or whatever, to just kind of stay relevant real time in terms of the needs that are popping up. You know, so paying attention to anxiety, paying attention to isolation. You know, when I'm in schools, you can see, you know, the impact of a kindergartner who's really exhibiting a, you know, a 2-year-old or 3-year-old behavior, right? And so what are the supports, you know, that those teachers need? How can the paras, our para educators, help out? So when I meet with those unions, you know, listening, many times the para educators have been in the field longer than the teacher. So how can they support and provide mentorship around, you know, how to communicate with families? This is where the equity work comes in, the implicit bias. Like, how are you reaching out to those families to really get a sense of what's going on in a way that feels empathetic and humane and not belittling. So all of that to say, to try to, and it's difficult because everybody is stressed out. As Mike said, the level of staffing issues is astounding. I just don't have any other way to say it, to the point where I think even how we have to think about staffing has got to innovate, right? Because it's going to be a minute. We're seeing retirement rates across the state of California increase. And I don't think it's like, okay, next year things are going to go back to normal. No, we need to think even more flexibly around how we're staffing classrooms, because we're going to need to continue to have these extra supports for the lingering effects, you know, that we need. Just one small thing, one thing that we did that we're beginning to see some dividends for is we did a lot of intentional, even virtual kind of transition partnership between our pre-K teachers and our kindergarten and transitional kindergarten teachers. So kind of virtual visits to the classroom, automating kind of information on both the socio-emotional side and academic side. What are the strengths and the assets of that particular child so that the incoming kindergarten and transitional kindergarten teacher has a sense of who this kid is, but more from, let me start with their strengths. We've seen in California the disproportionality rates for African-American and Latino families in terms of push out, whether it's a suspension or that pipeline into special education start as early as 3, 4, 5. So the idea of really starting those conversations from every kid has an asset and a gift, and really having that, you know, in written form on paper to start those conversations, bringing Head Start into the conversations, you know, bringing our local libraries into, let's celebrate and really talk up the importance of starting school, you know, at that kindergarten age, and knowing how important it was to do that even in the challenges of virtual reality because of the pandemic. So it hasn't been perfect, but we have seen in places where we were able to provide that support. The chronic absenteeism this year versus that last year went down, and just greater enrollment and just kind of participation and engagement. So I'll stop there so others can join in the conversation. But thank you, Cheryl, Ms. Cheryl, for just sharing some of the things. I think we're seeing a lot of the same challenges across the nation.
No, thank you for that. And I'd love either Superintendent Kurt or Superintendent Zachary Ross to jump in and share.
Well, I'd love to. You know, I think one of our advantages of being a small district is that we can do so much in a small portion. We see these same challenges. Students are coming to school. They haven't been in school. They haven't had preschool. They probably didn't even go to a child care center. Yet that's why we started early, even with those who had not been in school with that Boots on the Ground campaign. A third of our students came to school for every week, from the week we got out of school to the week right before school started. So we had an advantage. We had an advantage by starting early. We also have a pyramid. I am a Delta, but we had a pyramid approach where the student is in the middle. At the top is the teacher. We have a climate and culture coach in every building. as well as an instructional coach. We also have a 31A social worker and a special ed social worker in every single building. We know we need it. We're unapologetic about asking for help. So there's a community mental health millage in our county, and I'm like, we deserve more. Give me the social workers you have. Give me the support folks you have. We have a ROS clinic with the U of M, where there's a behavior specialist there, a physician there on site, a dentist on site. We have been using this pandemic as an opportunity to serve our students. I told you about the compassion resilience circles that we had last year, and that was district-wide. This year, we have trainers, and we got it paid for again through U of M. We asked U of M in Eastern Michigan constantly for things. They trained a staff member, 2 staff members in each building, 1 to run the 6-week compassion resilience circle for staff, and 1 to run the compassion resilience circles for our families. We say, just like you said, Dr. Johnson, first, take care of yourself. If you're not okay, you can't come in here and teach anybody. Then take care of your own family, and last, come to this job and take care of that. We've had that constant mantra because everyone is feeling that stress. And we've said all together with our motto is we're stronger together. And so as the community school, what we tell them is people support what you help create. Come create it with us. And I just say the only way for us to move forward, to get all of our students engaged, and I mean those who are coming up, the 3-year-olds, the 2-year-olds, is to get the community, as Dr. Logan talked about. We cannot do this alone. It will take us multiple years to move through this and to have our students fill that gap. Yet, as Dr. Kyla said, we are cultivating the genius. We've got Godi Muhammad here constantly doing our historically racial literacy lesson plans, knowing that we've got to do something about identity, and they've got to be able to feel like they can be successful, even though right now it looks a little bleak. We're the answer. The schools are the answer. No one needs to come and tell us what the answer is. And if we work together, we can ensure that our students will be on the right track.
Thank you. Just the positivity and the motivation to meet students' needs is truly inspiring. Thanks to all of you. And Mike or Superintendent Kurt, I want to give you the opportunity to jump in on this as well.
I really can't add anything to what they said, except for everything, it's all about stopping and figuring out. And I responded to somebody's question they had, with our earliest learners, we have to get back to play. We have to get back to fun at school. We have to get back to joy, things like that, because they're not experiencing a lot of that in many cases. Now, there are a lot that obviously are, but there are so many that are not. And I think, Elena, it was you that mentioned faces, fighting, we call them faces, fighting aces. And we've had community conversations about that for the last several years. And so luckily, we kind of have a community machine geared up to deal with issues that are happening. What we started last year and what we're continuing this year is online teletherapy and trying to really work with our most needy students, especially when they don't have access. We don't have access to a lot of providers here in town. We have some, but it's parents' ability to get their children to their providers. So therefore, if we do teletherapy in school, that seems to be working better for us.
Thank you, Superintendent. You mentioned partnerships, and I keep hearing this is a theme with partnerships across all of your districts. And I wanted to ask about public housing and public housing developments, and whether you have partnerships with them, and talk a little bit about those.
So I'll start. We don't have a specific partnership with our public housing authority, but we have Boys and Girls Clubs, we have Campfire, and we have YMCAs that are located in our buildings or located in our housing units where we support that. In other words, everyone's connected. And the housing authority, we go through them mainly for food distribution and other basic necessities as far as that goes. In other words, we we provide it, we take it to them. They act as a hub to distribute supplies and stuff like that. So not a specific relationship, I guess, contractually.
We do as we have a partnership kind of with our housing authority within the area where we've really focused on chronic absenteeism and engagement. But we have a broader partnership. It's called the Oakland Thrives Leadership Council. And so we have public health on that council. We have Kaiser, the mayor, myself, other community-based organizations in various parts of the community, particularly our Latina community, African-American community, Southeast Asian community. And so we're looking at things like, you know, guaranteed income to families. I mean, to the points of how there are things that we can't do alone as a school district, but really being able to raise and lift up. Here are some of the challenges we're seeing in the schools. Here's what we're seeing is the root. You know, how can you help us better reach students and families? Because again, the best place to reach students and families is within the hub of the school. And so that's kind of how I started this conversation, that really reimagining how these partnerships, huge sectors that separately, we actually all have all the resources we need, right? It's just really having the courage to push on how leadership is working together, because we have to work like this now, right? To really think about housing insecurity. We cannot go at the normal bureaucratic snail's pace, which we can only do if I'm doing the education thing over here, public health is doing this thing over here. You've got all these volunteers. I mean, there's so many, you know, individual volunteers, whether they're folks who are retired, I want to help, I can give. And so really spending time, how do you create the infrastructure to give the resources, whether it's time, you know, whether it's talent, or whether it's money. So I see kind of the housing authority as that part. Back to the pieces that Mike was mentioning around the play, bringing in our libraries, bringing in other community-based organization, because I worry all of that can't just fall on the classroom teacher or even the instructional assistant anymore with everything that they're dealing with. So again, I do think that so much of our work as leaders is just having a vision and reimagining how sectors can work differently to get the resources to students and families of need.
Superintendent Logan, Superintendent Zachary Ross, do you want to bring in any more about partnerships?
Well, just to connect what my sister just said, first of all, for us, I already mentioned during the summertime and last year we had our learning labs right there in the housing authority, in their community centers. Yet we have to do more. And she talked about something that our Washtenaw Community of Color Leadership Group did. We partnered with the community college to encourage those families, those parents mostly, or those who had graduated who had not had a plan, to apply for the child care development certification at our community college so that we can get high quality child care centers available at affordable prices. We can have parents working to get them that paid for. So we all came together and ensured that if they wanted to apply, everybody could take it. We'd help them pay for the courses. We would pay for the courses. We worked with Michigan Works to ensure if they needed a ride there, we made sure that was paid for. We're paying for all their books. We're paying for the test and for the test prep class. Because again, this is a big partnership. We've got to start early with our child care centers. And the way we get to the housing authority is to start with those child care centers and ensure we have quality child care so that when they get to GSRP and Head Start age, that they can have had those opportunities that Mike talked about.
We have a lot of partners here in Omaha, and we have a lot of needs. And because we do not have, and this state safety net. The safety net here is philanthropy. And so philanthropy works with many of the supporting organizations, all of whom we have relationships with, to include public housing. And, you know, there's lots to be said for those partnerships where they work, where there are issues, but I can't say there's been a single person who hasn't been supportive. Initially, when we had in the last, in 2020, in the spring of 2020, where we didn't have one-to-one devices, we went to one-to-one devices, and we did not do hotspots. We just gave everybody cellular data, because this notion, because kids are mobile, right? So they can't, you know, assuming that they're going to be in one space is not realistic. I will tell you, there've been some partners, and it's so funny, you kind of wonder where your spirit is on certain days, because there were some partners we had who discouraged, when we went back to school, discouraged where kids were living, who discouraged kids from coming to school because they didn't want them to bring the virus back. And these were the kids who need to be in school the most. So it may be, Dr. Johnson, where where my spirit is today, as I've, you know, been working with folks. And, you know, but I will say that, you know, people have been very supportive. I do think that the duration of the crisis, and I think you talked about that, is really what we see taking a toll now. I went to my board at the end of August and I said, hey, there are not enough teacher work days in this calendar. I know we approved it, but we're gonna have to add some more. So we literally added 5 more days for our staff. And I would tell you, one was on Friday, and I laughed and I said, I don't think if I hadn't added that days, I don't even know if everybody would have gone to work on it, because people are just, they are really tired. So I think tempering our enthusiasm with wanting to, I don't even know, it's return to normal. I don't even know what that means anymore. But wanting to get to move past it with understanding some of the stages of grief that people are going through in terms of grieving the life that we all had prior, and understanding that typically in schools, when we deal with a crisis, we deal with the crisis, we go back home, we're not in the crisis. And the perpetual present is one of the psychological terms that I saw coined recently that just really speaks to me, and that, you know, folks are wanting for this next thing. And we were all excited about getting back to school this year, and we are excited to be back, and then to deal with the worst crisis in terms of workforce that hopefully we hopefully don't face anything harder than this. And I think we were anticipating some, but I don't know a superintendent who was anticipating the degree to which people were going to evaporate from the workforce. You know, and I think as a country, as a country, we have to be thinking about, when you cannot get the children to school who need to be in school the most because you do not have enough school bus drivers, then we just have a fundamental issue. Because if we are surrounded, our district is surrounded by 11 white flight districts. And even despite our size, we there are that many districts. And when you think about who's going to suffer the most in a workforce crisis, it's our kids, right? Those are going to be the places where we experience the most need. And so, although we're doing everything we can, raising salaries, signing bonuses, and those kinds of things, it's a real issue for the country. And in terms of our resolve around public education and making sure that just fundamentally kids can get there, and then that they have a teacher and all the other support folks that we use every day to make it go. So again, that's just where my heart is a little heavy today, and watching the gap widened. Now the workforce gap widened to districts who need staff the most, having the most difficulty because the kids have the most needs and the most challenges, and it's the most reward you can get, but it's also the most difficult work, so.
Well, thank you for that.
Laura, do you mind if I add something real quick?
Oh yeah, please go ahead.
So what Cheryl was just saying about this idea of students coming to school and quarantining and masking, I mean, we have not seen spreader events in our classrooms. We have not seen students giving it to students. We've had isolated incidences, and they're more so happening in housing projects. They're happening in family groups. That's where spreader events are happening. They're not happening at school. And this fear, that the word that we used was terrifying ambiguity, that people didn't know last year. We know now that it's not spreading, at least in Wichita Falls schools, luckily, and hope I need to knock on something, it doesn't start. We're not seeing those spreader events. So therefore, parents, please send your children to school, because we feed them at least twice, sometimes 3 times a day. We give them a nice place to be. We give them a caring adult or 2 or 3 every day we give them their friends, and that's so much better than students not coming to school. So I think there was a question from somebody about this idea of students coming to school where they could potentially get sick. I get that, but it's not happening, in my opinion, in schools the way some people want to portray that as our schools being the incubators of this. It's not. It's in family groups and other events, and not in at least Wichita Falls schools.
Thank you. We've got a number of questions coming in from participants, and some of them are related to educators. And I'm wondering a couple of things, like how are you supporting early educators and both like those teachers of young children in the elementary schools, but also how are you connecting or collaborating more, if you are, with the early childhood community and educators in community-based programs that feed into your schools, thinking the longer term about children who will be coming in to schools in the next several years?
I can start off in that vein. One, our strategic plan actually focuses on early literacy as kind of the place to get to 3rd grade, and beyond that, really drawing early literacy all the way to high school graduation. And so I say that because I think whatever your strategic plan actually prioritizes, becomes the focus within your organization over time, and obviously draws in, partners and where people want to focus. Secondly, our early childhood department, there's still work to do because silos are real in large public organizations, but having that group in our department meetings with K-12. And we've been doing this work for a while, but just building that sense of, we've had instances over the years where you'd have your CDC, your Child Development Center, on the same campus as the elementary school, and perhaps they say hello and get together during holiday professional developments, and that's about it. But really developing, this sense of administrator support, professional development, having our principal supervisors have early literacy cohorts to raise awareness in terms of the importance of focusing on that area, knowing those programs if they are on the campus, and bringing that into the fold. So now a lot of our disproportionality work around special education, we're focusing in that area. We're focusing on the mindset and implicit bias of that area, because we're seeing, you can draw that all the way to kids who are being kicked out in 8th grade and 9th grade, right, in 10th grade, looking at the work that we need to do to try to prevent some kids from being, placed into special education for emotionally disturbed. I hate that label, but that is the label in our state, which are primarily Black and brown boys. And so really doing a lot of that, I guess, organizational mindset work, organizational structuring. So it's not so much this separate kind of work and program and schooling from TK and K, and doing a lot of cross pollination. Our equity office has been magical. We now have a pipeline program for some of our Black kings who are serving as early literacy tutors for them to be able to go to school. So I'm connecting that back to the staffing. I think every particular school district, small, urban, rural, we've got to get back into the business of residency, pipelines. There are people in the community who want to work in our schools. We just have to have the courage to push on the, regulations so that people get the support. It's expensive to be an educator and get paid 2 pennies, right? And so funding people to be able to go into education who want to work in areas where the work is hard, but they want to work with our kids so that they can actually fill positions as substitutes, as paraeducators, bus drivers, all of these places where we're all struggling to find people. I think that's another example where we're going to have to think differently now in terms of what we're seeing in terms of the workforce.
Yeah, I was going to say, Laura, we this past year, and this is part of our actually planned work in our strategic plan, our pipeline work using our high schoolers, and we hired them to be our paraprofessionals this summer. And it was, I don't know, it was maybe about 10 days ago, a person brought to me a problem around bilingual persons to translate for parent conferences. And I'm like, we got 15,000 kids in high school and half of them speak another language. So there's your workforce. And the person was like, it was literally like Columbus discovering America, not really a thing, right? So, and the kids are going to get paid $18 an hour, right? And some of these will be via Teams and some will be in person. But to Kyla's point, like we do have a lot of resources within, and we have to be okay with using them. So when we did our interns this summer, one of the things I said was, we need to have a lot of English language learners from our high school students who are our interns and the team made it happen. I know it was, I'm sure they cursed my name because I was just like, nope, we've got to have, and it was a really, literally we had 40% of our students were actually 57 total, 57% of the students who were our intern paraprofessionals, our high school students, were children of color, right? And these are people that are, we're working to make sure they're interested in teaching and talk to them about how they can get, each of them, if they want to be a teacher, can find somebody here in Omaha to pay for their education. And, that's the work that I know I'm the most excited about because it's kind of hopeful, right? So, and we have to do that work. We cannot depend on universities to do that work. We certainly can't depend on them to produce teachers of color. That's kind of be insane for us to do that because to date they have not done it. So I don't know why we would expect that. And to me that is where we have the kids. We have the advantage because we have them. And if you think about how many teachers you need, you have 4,000, we have about 4,500 graduates a year. I just need a small portion of them to go into teaching to find that as something that they want to do, or all the other kinds of jobs that we have. Our kids who are in career education jobs, who are in plumbing or whatever, guess what? We hire plumbers. We have plumbers who work for our school district. There's no reason that kids can't come back. So I think that is, we do have a lot of advantages in terms of workforce, but we do have to be more forward thinking and understand that some of the work will have fruit well down the road. Companies do this all the time. They invest. Baseball teams, spend a lot of money, Major League Baseball, on farm teams for people that they know are never, ever even going to play one day in the major leagues. But, you know, they make that investment. I talked to my students about that, and I told them, I said, I'm sorry, I can't play you like a Major League Baseball player, but that's our strategy. And so I think those are some of the things that we have to keep moving forward, and we will continue to do that. In terms of the early childhood thinking, we actually adopted a K-5 in March of 2020. We got our K-5, our new K-5 curriculum approved. So we adopted it, yes, in pandemic year. And then as part of our early literacy strategy, we added reading recovery. Very expensive. The best, it's the gold standard, right? So I've been able to go and visit, and it is so hopeful, right? You watch those little kids in there, and they've now 3 or 4, 5 weeks in of going, and watch how quickly they are progressing. And we're talking about how, okay, some of those strategies we can teach some of our young people, and they can go into homes of either homes of the people that they live with, or, you know, work in the homes where they live with their siblings, or with their relatives or close folks close by, to replicate some of those strategies with our youngest learners. Lots of ways to think about how we use our high school students and pay them. They shouldn't be working for free to support our young people, and then perhaps spark or light a spark in terms of them wanting to come back and serve as educators in our school district.
Growing your own workforce, right?
Pretty much.
There's a couple of questions that have come in around the missing kindergarten numbers. And so one of them is asking, are there strategies that you're seeing work to find children who are not enrolled in kindergarten or first grade right now? And then related to that is, how are you engaging families to come back into school?
I mean, this is definitely a challenged area, but what we're seeing is being able to invest in a plethora of one-to-one strategies. I mean, it really comes down to, for every family that has not shown up, really ensuring that you have a village of folks who know that community well, who are calling families one by one, because what we're finding is the circumstances are, they're just varied, right? And so for us being able to have, although we're building it overnight, our independent study program started, I think, in July when our legislation was approved by the state with 200 kids. We have over 1,000 now. And I am projecting it'll kind of wax and wane based on what we're seeing in the variant in California. And so that definitely has been what we've heard from some sectors of our community. We just don't feel comfortable coming to school at this time. So, you know, us trying to be as nimble, again, as a large public organization to respond to that call. Others, we've actually continued to have. We created last year a pediatric task force, and we've done kind of listening sessions just about the virus, for our African-American community, for our Latina community, for our Asian Pacific Islander communities, for our youth, to be able to get a sense of, for some of them, you know, what are the hesitancies through that. We've been able to get some families to go back as well. And then some of the reasons fall into what I shall dare say, some of the normal challenges around chronic absenteeism. And so we haven't lost sight of some of those strategies as well. And so I say village because what we've seen, and we've heard from students, we really don't want to hear about an educator around some of the virus. We'd actually rather hear from a medical professional that, okay, we'll get someone to come out, you know, from our community clinic that you respect. And so again, it's just another example where You know, the attendance clerk can't be the end all be all for many of these attendance challenges. It's really knowing your data, you know, who is in your school, what are the issues coming up from your community, and figuring out, sometimes getting the messenger right. Who is the best person to reach out to that particular parent, given the concern that they have, with the goal of trying to get the family into an in-person environment, and in some cases, a virtual environment, if that's what the family feels is going to work best at this particular point, selfishly with the hope that eventually they can come into the in-person environment. So it's very challenging. It's a lot of work, not only for schools, but for a system just to stay on top of it. But those are some of the just examples of some of the things we're doing.
Thank you for that. Superintendent Zachary Ross, you look like you wanted to jump in.
Yeah, she always brings great ideas that reminds me of what we're doing. And we've used folks that we typically wouldn't have. We have a group of parents called the Trusted Parent Advisors. We do pay them to go and knock on doors to find out, just like Dr. Logan talked about, we have every teacher writes a list, who's not here, who hasn't shown up. So we have access to that list. The Trusted Parent Advisors go out. We also have our community and family liaisons that knock on doors, and they have relationships. I think she hit it on the nail. It's about relationships. Last year, it wasn't the community liaisons or the trusted parents. We sent out the coaches because sports weren't happening, and they knew. They're like, oh, I know you got a brother at home. Where is he? He's not in school. Well, he's not at your house. Who is he at? Auntie's house? And go to Auntie's house and knock on the door. This is about relationships in order for us to get these students back. And just like you said, Dr. Johnson, it might not be an educator to do. It might not be us who have to help get that child back in school, or to get them enrolled, or to get them to come. It might be that auntie that we have a relationship with, or the neighbor. And I love the fact that I'm hearing from my colleagues who are there. We're the hub of the community. And so if we can be that place, continue to be that place, I believe that families have understood more than ever how valuable, invaluable schools are, our local public school. And the more valuable we are during this time, the more they're going to come. And they got to really trust us. They've got to trust that we're going to do what we say we're going to do. And the more they see that trust, the more they see, like Mike said, no, we don't have an outbreak. We've been in person. We've been in person all year last year. Come back. We have great mitigating strategies. Our educators are amazing. And that's the other thing. Can we just say our public school educators have done tremendously. They have shown up, even though, like Dr. Short, they are tired. They are exhausted. They've had to learn kind of every kind of teaching strategy they could to meet these students' needs, but they haven't given up. And so the more that our families know those teachers, keep the class sizes at our early childhood levels small, and continue to reach out and we got to go to them. They'll be back. They'll be back because they will find this is the place. They're getting turned around everywhere else, but here we've welcomed all of our families back.
Dr. Logan, you want to add? I see you off.
Oh, no, no.
Okay,
no,
just making sure.
No.
Great. Well, we are wrapping to a close here, and I have to turn it back over to Emily in just a second. But before we do that, this has been such a hopeful conversation. I know we've talked with so many challenges, but what all of you are giving me really great hope for this year and moving forward and doing such important work. And I would love to just end on you, like, short sentence, what's giving you hope?
Well, I can start. Children always give me hope. I was with my middle college students today at UNO, and they are amazing. I had my student ambassadors last night from all of my high schools. And I mean, they gave me an earful. They snitch on their teachers. I have to tell you that though. Woo, boy, I told them that's the most dry snitching I heard in a while. That is really, I mean, they give you hope. They are smart. They have done a lot of observing during this time and have a lot to share about challenges, and they have a lot to share about solutions. So many things that they talked about were just amazing. So it is, and it will be always staying focused on what their needs are. And I want to say one last thing. I think as much as we work with our public health partners, we have to hold our public health partners to all of the social determinants of health, because some did us a service, and some didn't do us as much of a service because they did not focus on all of that. And at no time did they mention or even care, and I know this is a strong word, about what it was going to be to take kids out of school. When I think about all the things that closed, the things that reopened first should have always been about the children. And we all know that. And I think that's what we are trying to do now, is to make sure that we put them first, and we hold them accountable for all of the social determinants of health. And schooling, and being in school is I think it's number 3 on that list.
Hi, Emily, back. And, I know, Laura, you intended for everybody to respond to that question, but I mean, Dr. Logan's words were so wonderful, and we are out of time, but I'm going to remind everybody that this webinar was recorded, and we will send it out to everybody so you can watch it again and again and again as much as you need to. We cannot thank you enough. We know how busy you are. We just heard about how busy you are, but we knew before that. The time you spent with us today, the ideas and insights that you share with us, there was so much positive feedback in the chat. We cannot thank you enough. Thank you so much. And thank you, Laura, for your brilliant moderation. Thank you to all of you superintendents. We cannot thank you enough. And we do want to encourage you to join us again. I have to say, some of the stuff that we've talked about today, we will be addressing in upcoming webinars. Next week, we're going to be talking about trauma-informed practices. We have a session coming up later in October with Jill Violette, who is the founder of Playworks, also talking about the potential of substitute teachers and kind of building that workforce. So again, please join us. We'll make sure you have the link to register. And we say thank you for your time, and thank you for the extra minute to everybody, and enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you again to our incredible speakers. And if you haven't yet, please complete our poll.